Hello there, this is Carl Freund again with Cambrian-AI Research. And today I have an interesting guest I think you'll enjoy hearing from. Alberto Romero is a former AI engineer developer who has taken a different turn, some might say a turn to the dark side. He's become, like me, a writer, and he's now a freelance writer on the Medium, talking about some very interesting AI topics. So Alberto, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carl. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I started reading your articles on the Medium. They got my attention about 3 or 4 months ago, and you've done a lot of very interesting topics and you've taken some interesting positions. But today, I'd like to talk about your thoughts on very large AI models. Of which you've written quite a bit about GPT-3 and other large AI models. Can we just start by defining for the audience what we mean by very large models?
So there are 3 characteristics of these models. And the first characteristic is that these models are extremely large neural networks, think billions of parameters, which contrast with the early neural networks of a decade ago that had just a few billion parameters. That's the first characteristic. Then they are trained in an unsupervised manner, which means we feed the models with huge amounts of text data from the internet. And then all these large AI models are based on the transformer architecture. This architecture was introduced by Google in 2017. And the intention was to leave behind convolutions and recurrence, other mechanisms, and leave only attention mechanism. And this architecture works is very simple. The basic workings. You input a chunk of text in the model, and the model has to look at that text, weight the importance of the words, and try to predict the most likely next word. It's as simple as that. It's basically a very powerful autocomplete model. So for example, if I say United States of, the model will try to predict America as the next word. And so in 2018, OpenAI, which is a very popular AI company right now, realized the potential of these models and started experimenting. And in 3 consecutive years, they published 3 papers, and the GPT family was born. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers, and these are the quintessential large language models. They are based in the transformer architecture, they are extremely big, and they are pre-trained in an unsupervised manner. And OpenAI got very interesting results. With the paper on GPT, the first model, on 2018, they realized that combining the transformer architecture from Google with an unsupervised training, they could get incredible results that could compete even with supervised models that were specifically trained to handle single tasks. And then with GPT-2 and GPT-3, they went a step further and realized they could build multitasking models only by training these models with raw data from the internet and labeled data. They could feed a lot of data in these models, and the models would learn intuitively to do tasks that they had never seen before, which is amazing. And the main difference between GPT-2 and GPT-3 is that GPT-3, which is the most popular of the 3, is 100 times larger than GPT-2, with 175 billion parameters, which is, at the time, it was the largest neural network ever created. So this is basically what these models are, and the most popular ones.
So as I read your articles about some of the application areas of GPT-3, they're fascinating but scary. You know, You know, why don't you share a couple examples of models that have been built on GPT-3?
Right. So first, OpenAI published the paper on GPT-3 in mid-2020, and the main result, the main takeaway that we have to get from this is that GPT-3, being a generalist model, which means it can handle a lot of different tasks, could compete with the best supervised models, which are specialists. So a generalist model could achieve, in fact, a state-of-the-art results in some benchmarks, like machine translation and question answering. That's the first important takeaway. Then OpenAI decided to release the model, the GPT-3 model, through an API, because they wanted to see what users could get, what new use cases could find, and they find a lot of different things. For example, some users tried to test for conversational skills and decided to prompt GPT-3 to conduct an interview between Tim Ferriss and Marcus Aurelius. And one of the person is alive, the other is dead, but GPT-3 doesn't care. As long as there is information in the data set, GPT-3 knows about that. Another one designed an app to teach people specific topics from the experts, the historic experts on the topic. For example, philosophy from Aristotle, writing from Shakespeare. And then another one had conversations with that famous people like Jesus or Cleopatra. Then other people went to test creative skills that not even OpenAI people have thought about that. Some realized that GPT-3 could code in a lot of different languages. Others try to create poetry or songs. And then a lot of companies saw the potential in this model and decided to build services on top of GPT-3 and created companies that could copyright as good as we can, advertising, emails, and digital marketing. And there are a lot of companies right now that are built on top of GPT-3 and do a really good job on these things. And then other people went for the bigger questions, the biggest question, like the meaning of life, the meaning of the number 42. And so what we can see is that GPT-3, as long as it's facing a language task, it has some degree of skill to solve it. So it doesn't matter what you try it to do, it knows somehow how to tackle that.
It's scary. I mean, I can imagine my job as an analyst could quickly be taken over in the next 5-10 years, which is fine. I'll do something else by a generative pre-trained model. But one of your examples that really caught my attention on the Medium, you wrote about somebody who had wanted to bring his late fiance back to life. It's very much like the movie Her, where Samantha becomes the man's imaginary lover, and it was kind of scary. And OpenAI shut that down. They didn't think it was appropriate. That's one of the things about OpenAI. GPT-3 is not an open platform. It's only available, as you mentioned, via API. What are some of the problems people have seen from this mysterious AI technology?
So there are a lot of GPT-3 has a lot of good things for humanity, but there is always a darker side in AI, and large language models are an exception, and GPT-3 isn't either. And so some of the problems, for example, bias and discrimination is very well known in deep learning because the data that we have created is biased. So it's not the problem of the algorithm, but large language model accentuate this problem because they are more powerful, so they can do more harm. And in fact, OpenAI acknowledged this in their paper because they realized that GPT-3 has race, gender, and religious biases, and they still release the model, even if through a private API, but they release that. So that's one problem. Another important problem is the lack of understanding of these models, because they are incredibly good at sounding human. You read a GPT-3 extract, and if it's good, you don't know if it's written by a human or not. But they don't understand anything that they write. In fact, they've been called stochastic parrots as a form of mockery, because they just repeat what they've been fed, and they don't even do it in a reliable manner. So they just, and that's a problem because people tend to tend to ascribe intention to the text that GPT-3 output because it's very credible. It sounds human. And so this is another problem. Then, of course, we hear this in the news every other day, the fake news and the misinformation that this type of models can spread. And also OpenAI realized this. And in fact, they highlight this as one of the strengths of this type of models, and GPT-3 in particular, because only half of the time human judges were able to correctly classify GPT-3 text as written by the AI, which means that half of the time they didn't know. They thought it was written by a human. And in fact, a college kid proved this just like a month after OpenAI released the API and decided to create a blog entirely made by GPT-3. And he even got one of the posts to the #1 spot in Hacker News and amassed, I think, 26,000 visitors in 2 weeks or something like that. A blog made completely by GPT-3. So writers should be somehow scared because it's real. Almost no one realized that it was written by GPT-3. And the last problem that this is very common, this is very well known, even outside of artificial intelligence, and is the threat to the workforce. Because we know that technology always threatens workers because you can do things faster and more efficiently. And now what has changed is that large AI models are now threatening white collar jobs. So the jobs that we do with the brain, for example, writers or coders or analysts, for example. And current reports say that in 15, 20 years, as much as 50% of all the jobs in the United States could be lost because of AI, because we are advancing incredibly fast. So these are, I think, the most important social problems that these large models carry.
Wow, that's scary. You know, the optimist in the room would say, yeah, but it frees humans up to do more valuable things. Not that writing is not a valuable thing, but hopefully it frees, you know, it's a question of whether you view AI as replacing humans or augmenting humans. And I don't pretend to know the answer to that question, but we'll certainly find out, I think, in the next 10 years. Now, there's one of the things, of course, many of my clients love these big models because they take a ridiculous amount of computational power, right? I think I've seen estimates that it probably costs OpenAI $12–14 million. Yeah. And much of that is in, you know, GPU hardware on the massive cloud they built with Microsoft using NVIDIA GPUs. So that implies a very high cost of training, but also in using these models. The inference processing of these models is probably out of the reach of most companies, so it's not really relevant to them. What are your thoughts about that?
So that's another important problem because training and deploying these models is so costly that only a few big tech companies can afford the costs. And in fact, OpenAI started as a non-profit company. They wanted to benefit everyone with creating artificial general intelligence and not just shareholders, as they say. But then they realized that they had to put a lot more money if they wanted to create these large AI models. And they partnered with Microsoft. And Microsoft funded them with $1 billion. And so they signed an exclusive license to Microsoft to use these models. And in fact, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, Microsoft released a news that they are going to include GPT-3 in Azure, in their cloud platform. So that's what happened. And the problems, the consequences of this is that GPT-3 is very costly for users, for companies. If they want to use GPT-3, they have to pay a lot for each word that GPT-3 generates.
Oh, they charge by the
So,
word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just by the word. And so a lot of companies, a lot of interesting research projects and entertainment projects had to shut down. And only those that had already enough money to pay or that charge a lot to their users could keep using GPT-3.
Now, there's alternatives to GPT-3, such as the one in China that are even larger. And are they more generally available as open platforms, or are they also restrictive like the OpenAI APIs?
I think there are two types of alternatives to GPT-3. First, we have, for example, Good-Out 2.0 or some models that Google has made, but they don't release the models because they think that it's not safe to do this. In fact, OpenAI thought the same with GPT-2, but in the end, they end up releasing it. But most companies fall on that side. But then there are some non-profit groups of developers that are trying to copy GPT-3 and other models. And right now, I think the most powerful one is GPT-J. That is similar to the most powerful GPT-3, but I think instead of 175 billion parameters, it has like 7 billion or something like that. It's very powerful, but it's not as powerful as GPT-3. But it's open source, so in principle, everyone could take the code, and if they have enough computing power, they could run it. But it seems like costly.
It seems like that would create problems because with fewer models, it'll be less precise and more error prone than GPT-3 or other very large models. So what's the future of this? Where's this all headed? I mean, a lot of people try to talk about this becoming general artificial intelligence, which it's not today. Will it become general AI?
So one thing that is important to say is that it's true, GPT-3 is not artificial general intelligence and is not even close because, for example, it lacks reasoning or understanding of the world. It doesn't know anything about the world. But there are a lot of uses that people, for example, the story that you mentioned earlier about this guy who used a chatbot service to somehow bring back to life the memory of his late fiancée, which is like some years ago it was food for science fiction, and now it's beginning to be possible. So we don't know how far in the future is artificial general intelligence, but what's clear is that large language models are a big jump forward. And I wanted to end with some questions for the viewers to think about, because if we continue this path, be it large language model or other type of algorithms, it's possible that sometime in the future, we will match our intelligence with artificial models. And we have to think about what that could mean in the future, because these models could, for example, learn to replicate themselves and eventually grow so intelligent and so powerful that they create this moment in time that experts call the singularity. And how could we, for example, make sure that these artificial intelligence systems are aligned with our values? Because when that time comes, if it comes, we won't have any power anymore. So these models would be so powerful that we simply won't be able to do anything about that. And the question is, what do we need to get there from where we are now? We need algorithmic breakthroughs. We need more data. We need different types of hardware, for example, neuromorphic computing. We need to combine the software brains of artificial intelligence with the hardware of the robotic bodies, for example. So these are some questions for the future that we need to think about, because if we continue this path, we will get there eventually.
Yeah, I think it's I think Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and others that have warned this as about being the most dangerous existential threat humanity faces. When they first said that, I thought, oh, come on, yeah, relax. It's not. But when I read some of your pieces about what GPT-3 and other large models can do and the trajectory that we're on, I think that some darker sides of human nature, like greed, will continue to drive, and pride will continue to drive us in a direction which could become dangerous. But I also think that it could provide tremendous value to humanity, to society, to the economy. And we have to find some way to manage that risk. I know the US government's now talking about some sort of Bill of Rights around AI. And I think transparency, maybe every GPT-3 produced text has to identify itself as like, this has been produced by an AI. So that when a submarine commander gets an order to launch, right, you'd like to know whether that came from the president or leader of the country that owns a submarine, or came from an AI that just got a crazy idea, got some bad data. It's a scary world we're living in. But I really appreciate your work in helping us mortals understand where this is going and what we've already wrought, and what perhaps lies ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
I look forward to continuing to read your work. I'd recommend my audience follow your work on Medium towards AI. It's a pleasure to talk with you. Thought-provoking, scary, thought-provoking, and I appreciate it. Thanks, take care, and stay well.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
You bet. Bye-bye.